course, this season, there's been some links with Jose Mourinho potentially for the Newcastle job. He's just been sacked by AS Roma. Are there any updates, please, about his links with the club?
Yeah, obviously Jose Mourinho is out of work, so he is going to be an attractive option for a lot of clubs looking managers. Obviously, since Eddie Howe has gone into Newcastle, it's always been a nagging doubt in people's head. Would they go for a bigger name in the future to sort of fulfill their ambitions they've got under PIF, that they want to go and bring in a top-class manager who's won honours? And obviously Jose Mourinho ticks a lot of those boxes. For me, I don't think it would be the right move. I think Jose Mourinho in his latter years, he has regressed a bit. We've seen that what's happened at Roma. Although he did win a Conference League title, Roma are well down the pecking order in Serie A. And I think if Jose Mourinho is to find a new club, I think the Saudi Pro League is probably perfect for him right now. He's going to be very attractive for them. He's got a huge following globally as well, and he will definitely enhance the Saudi Pro League if he is to end up going there. And there is a couple of clubs in the Saudi Pro League who are looking for new managers. So I think opportunities will come for Jose Mourinho in the Saudi Pro League, and he's never hidden his desire maybe to go out there and manage. He said he's turned down offers already from some clubs. So I think the next step for Jose Mourinho following his departure from Roma is a move to the Saudi Pro League and not to Newcastle. I think Newcastle, they've got to keep faith with Eddie Howe. He's done a remarkable job. He's probably got them ahead of expectations where they expected to be when the Saudi PIF fund took over the club. He got them into the Champions League. It's been a difficult season so far this season, but I think that's a lot down to injuries. He's lost a number of key players for a long period of time. And as we were talking about FFP and everything else, Newcastle haven't been able to buy their way out of trouble this season due to having to deal with the finances at the club, that they can't really go out and spend of what the owners have got, because there's no doubt the owners are willing to spend. They just can't do it because they don't want to be hit by charges of FFP.
And Paul, as sort of Pete very nicely wrapped up for us there, of course, they've had some real injury problems. Joe Linton most recently is now out for the whole season. How do they recover from here? 10th in the table, 11 points off top four. As Pete rightly said, they've certainly improved on where they were last year. They've come leaps and bounds. But of course, this season's been a bit of a stumbling block. And you can't really blame them. The injuries have been a massive problem. But where do they go from here for the second half of the season?
Well, that's what they've got to do. They've got to take it as the second half of the season. He's been hugely hit by injuries. The Tonali situation as well. I mean, we forget about that the player that they spent 55 million on, he saw that as a real key component to his side this year, and he's been deprived of him all season, and he is for the rest of the season. I mean, that's another subject totally. I mean, AC Milan don't sell players, they don't sell the captain, but they sold Tonali at the start of the season. So somebody, I suspect, knew something somewhere. But for Eddie Howe's point of view, they need to get some players through the door to help him get through the end of the season. They're looking at European place, but I think, as I always say, with success comes expectation, and the success that they had last year has sent the expectation levels at Newcastle through the roof, and understandably so. I mean, yes, let's be honest, they overachieved last year with what they had. The squad of players they had, the manager, what he did with those players last year, they overachieved. And getting in the Champions League this year, and it was all just a little bit too much for them to cope with. That group, potentially, if there was a penalty in Paris, they would have got out of that group potentially. But would that have hampered them with the more fixtures going forward in the second half of the season? They're in a really difficult run of games. I'm looking at the form. I mean, they had a fantastic win at Sunderland, which will obviously boost confidence. In my opinion, I thought they played really well against Manchester City. The 11 that he put out, they were unfortunate not to get something from the best team in the world. Previous to that, the 4 defeats on the bounce, obviously going to be disappointing for him. But for me, Eddie Howe's got a lot of credit in the bank, and I think he has with Newcastle supporters. I think the togetherness between him and the supporters, they understand what he's done there. I mean, the Newcastle supporters are very, very knowledgeable supporters, and they understand. They can see what he's had to deal with. They can see what he's done, where he's taken that football club, and he's earned the right to have a little bump in the road, if you like, to have this quiet time. You know, you can give managers millions and millions, but the greatest gift you can give any manager, the greatest gift you can give any good manager is time. Because if you've got a good manager with good players, who's a good coach, time, he can work with the players that he's got. Eddie Howe deserves the time to do that. For me, Jose Mourinho, he's box office. He's absolutely brilliant. I think he's fantastic. I think he's great for the Premier League, but I wouldn't want him at my club. I mean, he's been at my club. He's been at Tottenham. He's a serial winner, and Tottenham's the only club that he hasn't won anything with. He doesn't stay anywhere for longer than 3 years. From a Newcastle fan's point of view, I think you'd do very, very well to find 1 or 2% of Newcastle fans who would swap Eddie Howe for Jose Mourinho, because I certainly wouldn't.
Well, that is a big call. Actually, I do rate it. I think you're right. I think we've seen even in the Sunderland game in defeats over previous weeks that the fans are absolutely behind Eddie Howe, and there's no doubt about that. But I think there is some talk, of course, of where the owners are at versus the fans, and that's what you said earlier, Paul. The game is the fans, so we'll just have to see how that sort of rolls out. But Pete, you mentioned in there too about the fact that there might not be many signings in the door at St James's Park. Joe Linton's injured. They've really struggled across the field with injuries. Is there any update regarding their window? Are they eyeing up any players? Are there any talks of any players they might be signing?
Yeah, they are looking. Midfield is the priority area that Newcastle have targeted since the opening of the January transfer window. Calvin Phillips has been the name that's been on most people's lips, as he would be the ideal fit to go into that Newcastle midfield. Obviously, he's not playing at Manchester City, and the player himself wants to move to get regular first-team football ahead of the Euros this summer with England. So he would tick a lot of boxes for Newcastle right now, but there is sort of sticking points in his potential move. Manchester City are looking at a big loan fee of around £7 million. Newcastle are not able to pay that right now due to the FFP regulations are right on the fringes. So that's sort of holding up the pursuit of Calvin Phillips. They've also looked at the Atalanta midfielder, Ederson, a Brazilian midfielder, who's had a very good season in Serie A, very highly rated as well, but Atalanta have no plans to sell him in January, and it's not a deal I don't think Newcastle could afford this month either. He's probably going to cost in excess of 30 to 40 million pounds, so that's a deal they might have to look at next summer. Again, we mentioned it earlier in the show, Newcastle, probably the concern for them is when Darren Eales, I think, came out last week and admitted they might have to sell one of their prize assets just to help them along next season to meet FFP regulations. So lots of concern that maybe Bruno Gomes could be sacrificed, or an Alex Isak as well. So there's a lot of clubs now looking maybe to see if they could snare some of those top players from Newcastle. So I'm sure there will be interest in Bruno Gomes this summer as well, and that would come as a huge blow to Newcastle if they were to lose him. But I think for Eddie Howe right now, he just needs numbers in the building. He's down to two fit midfielders right now, and one of them is a 17-year-old in Lewis Miley, who's been really good for them since he's been put into the side as well. But for Eddie Howe, he wants to end the season on a high, try and get into those European places if he can, and he definitely needs help in the transfer market to do that. But their hands are a bit tied at the minute due to FFP restrictions.
I think my highlight of this window was when Fabrizio Romano tweeted that Bruno Guimaraes is in Paris, but he's not in Paris moving to PSG. He's going shopping. I thought that was a really good update that I really enjoyed, and many other fans did as well. Paul, looking at Newcastle now for the second half of the season, they take on Fulham in the next round of the FA Cup. How could you define a successful season for them this year? Is it a top six finish? Is it progressing, say, to the semi-final, the final of the FA Cup? What would Eddie Howe deem a success given their position at the moment?
Well, listen, a trophy would be huge, wouldn't it? We all know the need and the want for a trophy at Newcastle, and that would be fantastic for them. And I think they've got the opportunity to focus on that with, the European attention's gone elsewhere. I still struggle. I mean, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but I still don't understand managers of certain Premier League teams who aren't going to win the Premier League. They're not going to win the Champions League. Why do they change their team, make so many changes in the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup? What opportunity for fans to have silverware. You remember silverware as a fan for the rest of your life. They don't come around often unless you support one of the big clubs who dominate for a long period of time. The majority of football teams and football supporters don't get to see their team win a trophy. And the opportunity for the likes of Tottenham and Newcastle, West Ham, those type. I mean, look what the European trophy meant to those West Ham fans. It was incredible. So for Newcastle to win a trophy would be huge success. The FA Cup would be a fantastic opportunity for them to progress in the league this year. I don't think they can on what they did last year. I don't think they can finish in the top four, but from where they are and what they've got left to do, they may surprise us. So if you split the season into a second half of the season, a potential FA Cup and a European place would be progression from where they are at the moment.
Pete, how do you see it? Do you see it in the same way as Paul? Do you think they need to win a trophy, or do you think actually leeway will be given to Eddie Howe?
Yeah, I think he's got credit in the bank, Eddie Howe, from what he did last season at Newcastle, get into the Champions League, and obviously unlucky to go out of the group stages. Newcastle fans have been crying out for success for years now. Even under the glory days of Kevin Keegan, they didn't win a trophy. And Newcastle fans, we know they want success. We saw how much they enjoyed their trip to Wembley last year in the Carabao Cup final, which they lost to Manchester United. If Eddie Howe was to go and win the FA Cup with Newcastle, he's going down in folklore as the man who brought back trophies to Newcastle, and that's what fans want. Like Paul says, it's all well and good qualifying for the Champions League, earning money for the club and everything, and making European adventures, but winning trophies is what it's all about. Newcastle fans have been starved of success in recent times as well, so to win the FA Cup would go down in history for them if they could go and do it. And I think now it looks like they're out of this top 4 race. I think Newcastle have to give full focus to the FA Cup, because under the Mike Ashley years, it looked like they just wrote off the cups. They weren't really bothered. It was about just staying in the Premier League. Obviously, things have taken a dramatic turnaround at Newcastle. They're a lot more ambitious under the Saudi owners, and I think for Eddie Howe, he just wants to get some of those injured players back as soon as he can. And I think there's not many teams who would fancy facing Newcastle, especially at St James's Park, in the next round of the FA Cup if they are. They can pass Fulham as well. And in this FA Cup, we're going to see a lot of teams go out in the next round. We've got Tottenham v Man City coming up. We've also got Chelsea against Aston Villa. So there's a couple of Premier League teams who will go out at this stage as well, and that could really open up the path for a Newcastle or somebody else to go all the way in the competition.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.